Hello everyone, my name is Brennan Marr. That noise you're hearing is my ventilator. And welcome to Page Turners They Were Not, my Star Wars podcast. Today we're going to talk about Canon versus Legends. Oh yes. Yes, this is a can of worms to be sure. Let us see what opening it will bring. Now, in 2014, it was announced that all the novels, comics, games prior to that date would be declared Star Wars Legends, and that everything that came out afterward would be Star Wars canon. Now let's go back a little bit. When Star Wars came out in 1977, it was realized by Lucasfilm that there was room for new stories to be told. Starting with the 7th issue of the Marvel Star Wars comic, the Star Wars Expanded Universe began. And new stories outside of the films continued in comics and in novels. In 1978, the first Expanded Universe Star Wars novel came out. Alan Dean Foster's Splinter of the Mind's Eye. And so on and so forth. There were several things in the 80s. There were some cartoon shows, Ewoks and droids. There were the made-for-TV Ewok adventure movies, comics, a role-playing game, and then things really took off in 1991 with the publication of Heir to the Empire by Timothy Zahn. Now, when it was announced in 2012, the same day that it was announced that Disney had bought Lucasfilm, it was also announced that a new Star Wars trilogy would be coming. Now, immediately, as fans are wont to do, much speculation began. Now, with all of the expanded universe in place, people began to wonder, are Jason and Jaina Solo going to be in there? Did the Yuuzhan Vong War happen? Did Kip Duran use the Sun Crusher? Did Admiral Dalla's Mana installation? Yada yada yada. Did Han Solo's cousin, Thraken Sal Solo, rule Corellia in the grip of fear? These are some deep cuts, folks. That immediately came to mind. For a lot of fans, is how is this going to be involved? Now, I do remember this, when they announced it would take place, that Episode 7 would take place 30 years after Return of the Jedi. I went to Wikipedia, and I looked up if there was anything about the year 34 ABY, 34 years after the original movie, because Return of the Jedi took place 4 years after the original movie. And as I recall, nothing of major, nothing had happened that year in terms of what had been written in novels, comics, games, etc. So I thought, well, they could fit a story in there that wouldn't step on the toes of anything that had already been established. But I didn't think too much of it. And then in 2014, in April, they announced, in fact, I believe it was the day after they announced the cast of The Force Awakens. It was announced that this new initiative, that the only things at that point that were being considered canon, and just to explain, canon means the official continuity, the official story of Star Wars, would be the movies, the 6 films at that point, and the Clone Wars animated series. Everything else prior to that would be declared Star Wars Legends. So they retired the expanded universe term and replaced it with Star Wars Legends. That you will see on new printings of old Star Wars books, comics, games, etc. You will see a gold banner on the cover that says Legends. And then everything that would be created going forward would be Star Wars canon. They did also declare that they would be borrowing from the Legends as they wished, and using that in the Star Wars canon. Borrowing, but did not have to abide by everything established in Legends. Okay. Now, this caused a little bit of concern among some fans, as things often do. But for me personally, I agree. Well, let me explain. Timothy Zahn, as I mentioned before, who wrote Heir to the Empire, and kind of kick-started the Star Wars Expanded Universe, or reignited it, he said, and I agree, that it made sense for Disney and Lucasfilm to make that declaration about Legends and canon, because it meant that their hands were now, it meant that they were free to pursue the stories they wanted. Without having to worry about the continuity of the Legends material. And this is coming from a guy whose own books got declared no longer canon. He didn't mind at all. And I agree, they needed the freedom to tell the stories they wanted to tell. Okay. So, it's a bit complicated when you go back to prior to 2014. When it comes to what was canon. Now, it is often assumed by some that all the Legends material was once canon. Not entirely true. It was a very complicated system. A complicated system existed, basically saying that there were different levels of canon. Now, it is known that when George Lucas made the prequels, it did mess with the continuity that had been established up to that point. But because he's George Lucas, he had the right to decide in the movies what was canon. And George Lucas has never cared too much about the Legends material. So that was what they called G canon, George canon. He had to. His word was kind of final on a lot of these things. So there were different layers of canon. There was continuity contradictions left and right. I think it made sense to redefine the canon. Now, let's talk about canon versus legends. Oh boy. This is a tricky topic. Now, in canon, things went differently than they went in legends, quite obviously. But there are similarities. There are connections. For instance, in Star Wars Legends, Han Solo and Princess Leia get married and have twin children, Jason and Jaina Solo. In fact, I have a Black Series figure of Jaina Solo up on my wall. On my wall, I'm looking at her right now. Their son Jason eventually turns to the dark side. That's basically Kylo Ren. That's Ben Solo. So there are a lot of comparisons. Palpatine coming back as a clone. That happened in Legends. And it happens in canon. And so on and so forth. Now, as you can imagine, Legends tells very different stories than what occur in the sequel era canon material. And I suppose the question would become, which is better? Or, since it's all a matter of opinion, which do I prefer? Now, we'll get to that in a minute. Now, I, as I mentioned, was not bothered at all by the definition of what was canon versus what was legends. Because they were not erasing it. They were saying we're going to borrow it as is. We're going to borrow from it. It's not going to be completely erased. Not to mention, they did not stop publishing those books. You can still read those books. It's not like they erased them. There was some concern among the fans that when they would say, we spent money on that, we love those stories, I can't believe that you're not going to use them or that you're going to throw them away. Now, I don't know exactly what these fans wanted in terms of, were they wanting the sequel trilogy to just be adaptations of Legends? I guess what they wanted was the sequel trilogy to follow in the same continuity as established in the Legends books. Okay, I can see that point. But I think you would run the risk of a lot of contradictions. Lucasfilm would have to be on its toes constantly. The creators of the new content would have to follow previously established guidelines. That's fine, but I think what Lucasfilm wanted was for the creators to be able to tell the stories they wanted to tell. Now, I wasn't bothered at all. In fact, in 2014, I had actually not read that much of the Legends material. I was aware of it from some of the Star Wars guidebooks, like the chronology, and Wikipedia. I read a lot of that. I played a lot of video games, and I read the Sequel Trilogy and other such works. But I hadn't really delved too much into a lot of the novels and comics. Now that's changed since. In the years since, I've actually been reading a lot of the Legends material. And so it didn't bother me as much because I wasn't as emotionally invested. Now I can understand if there are people who are much more invested in it than me. But I just want to say that was never erased. Therefore, it still exists. You can still read it. And you can still have that as your own personal canon. That's totally fair. That can still be your Star Wars. So it was very interesting, I think, some of the things that they could borrow. Now, Timothy Zahn also said something that I absolutely agree with. He says they called it Legends for a reason. Timothy Zahn said, imagine, I'm paraphrasing here, but I think he said something about, like, say, Robin Hood, the story of Robin Hood. Now, Robin Hood, as we know, is a legend. But if we were to suddenly find a piece of evidence, historical evidence, that demonstrated that Robin Hood actually existed in some fashion, then there's more credibility to the legend. The legend becomes more fact. Timothy Zahn was saying that in Star Wars Legends, borrowing an element from Legends and making it canon is like discovering that something that people used to think was a legend actually was real. People used to think the city of Troy was a legend until somebody went and actually found the city of Troy. So I look at it that way. When they unearth a piece of Legends material and make it canon, it's like saying, well, this part of the story is true. But yet again, if you love the Legends, don't stop loving it just because the new movies don't follow it. Because that stuff still exists. And you can like both. You can like both, like I do. Now, when we come back, I'm going to give you what I prefer. We'll take a short break. I'll be right back. See you in a moment. Hello there, this is Brennan Marr, host of Page Turners They Were Not, a Star Wars podcast. And I'm here to tell you about Anchor. Anchor is the best way to make a podcast. Why is that? Well, first off, it's free. Yes, you heard me right. Anchor is free. Anchor has all the tools you need to make a podcast from your phone or your computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you on various platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can make money from the podcast. And get this, with no minimum listenership. That means you can make money even if no one listens to your podcast. That, of course, is not ideal, as Anchor will allow you to spread your podcast bring in more viewers, and you can make more money because of it. Everything you need to make a podcast is in one place on Anchor. If you're interested, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Thank you, and may the force be with you. Okay, we are back. All right, the big question. Which do I prefer? Now, I mentioned just a moment ago that I like both. I like the Legends, I like the Canon. I'm going to say that I actually prefer the Canon. Why is that? Well, as I mentioned before, because I was not such an avid reader of the Legends material, until just recently when I read a lot of it, I didn't really have that emotional investment or connection. I have a deep emotional connection to the Sequel Trilogy. I have loved it. In fact, not just the Sequel Trilogy, but Rogue One and Solo. I have loved all 5 of these movies. I've absolutely been moved. The Rise of Skywalker left me in weeping with joy. There is an emotional connection there that I have with the canon, at least with the films, that I do not feel with the Legends. Now, let's talk really quickly about the novels. Okay. Overall, I prefer the Legends novels. Okay. Now I'm going to say that overall, Legends versus Canon, overall, I prefer Canon. But if we were just to talk about the novels, I prefer the Legends novels. Now Canon, however, Canon has given us Lords of the Sith, Lost Stars. Those books are fantastic. I tried to read Heir to the Jedi. That bored me to death. I read A New Dawn. Bored me. It was okay, but it was kind of boring. I didn't even bother with the Aftermath trilogy. Yeah, so, and Timothy Zahn's new Thrawn trilogy, I gotta be honest, I love Timothy Zahn. I have not been that invested in these new books that he wrote. Tarkin was okay. I did not read Phasma. I didn't read Ahsoka. There's just something that has not grabbed me in the canon. Now, I cannot speak to the books that I did not read, other than to say I never felt motivated to read them. Now, Timothy Zahn is next going to be working on a trilogy of books about the Chiss, Grand Admiral Thrawn's people, the Chiss Ascendancy. The Ascendancy trilogy will be starting later this year. Now, you can bet I'm going to read that because I love Timothy Zahn. Even if his new Thrawn trilogy has not grabbed me quite as much. But I've not really felt motivated to read Ahsoka or Phasma or the Aftermath trilogy. I tried to read Dark Disciple, I just didn't get into it, things like that. So, now, when it comes to these new High Republic novels, you bet your bottom dollar I'm going to be there. I am going to be there. I'm going to be ready to read those. And hopefully those novels and comics are interesting. When it comes to the world of novels, and admittedly even comic books, I prefer the Legends. The Sequel Trilogy, Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and The Last Command were excellent. That is like the definitive Star Wars book trilogy. In terms of, if you want to know what is a good Star Wars novel trilogy to read. And some of the other stories in the comics, like the Tales of the Jedi, comics, even Dark Empire and all of its silliness. There is a lot in the Legends that I love. The video games, even. Actually, I have to admit, I haven't played any of the Canon Star Wars video games. A bit of an unfair comparison, but when it comes to novels and books, novels and comics, I think the Legends wins hands down. But overall, because of my absolute love of the Star Wars canon movies of the Disney era, and my love of Lost Stars and Dark Disciple. I'm sorry, not Dark Disciple, Dark Lords of the Sith. Because of my love, absolute love, by the way, I read Lords of the Sith in 2 days. It was that terrific of a read. I was so sucked in. On the strength of Dark Lord of the Sith, Lost Stars, and the sequel era movies. Overall, I prefer the canon. But when it comes to novels and comics, I prefer Legends. So you could argue my answer is a bit of a cheat. But nonetheless, that's how I see it. Let me know what you think of the Star Wars Legends and the Star Wars canon. Which do you prefer? Or do you prefer neither? Let me know what you think. My name is Brendan Marr. That noise you're hearing is my ventilator. And thank you for tuning in to Page Turners They Were Not, my Star Wars podcast. May the Force be with you.